All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Hannah Lupe, and I'm the managing editor for Young Adulting Review. Young Adulting Review is an online review magazine for books for kids and teens. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Emily de Angelis. Emily comes from a long line of visual artists, musicians, and storytellers. In addition to careers as a children's librarian and a teacher, she is a graduate of the Humber School of Writing and has spent many years developing her writing through independent study, workshops, conferences, and courses. She has been published in various anthologies and has won and placed in numerous short story contests. The Stones of Burren Bay is Emily's debut novel. Congratulations, first of all, and thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
Oh, no problem at all. I thoroughly am enjoying this part of bringing the book forward. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Okay, so for our first question, I was hoping if you would tell us a bit about yourself and your journey to publishing.
Well, the journey to publishing has really been about learning who I am as a writer.
Mm.
And I've always loved writing. When I was a kid in school, you used to have the creative writing notebook, and I loved the assignments. I loved to do the work. I wrote my first novel when I was 11 called The Golden Anka. I've lost track of it, sadly, but it was very Nancy Drewish. But I've always wanted to write. I haven't always defined myself as a writer, but I've always wanted to write. And then I went in through high school and university, learning to write more academically. And of course, had the quintessential teen poetry journal.
Oh.
Everybody has one of those.
Mhm.
Um, and so when I finished school, by the time I finished school, I was married and I had children, but I wanted to learn more. I knew loving to write wasn't the same as knowing how to write.
Mm.
So I joined organizations and I did workshops. I was a member of, and still am a member of Canadian Authors Association and Canscape and the Children's Book Center. And in 2010, and the story, The Stones of Burren Bay, kind of grew along through that whole process. I had a lot to learn. Um, and in 2010, I got an Ontario Arts Council grant. So I was able to go to at least apply, and I got into the Humber School for Writers. So
Mm.
that's when the work in earnest for The Stones of Burren Bay, which was not called the Burren Bay at that time, The Stones of Burren Bay. I'm trying to remember. I don't even know if it didn't have that identity then.
Mm.
And but that definitely was the beginning of it in 2010. I went through a developmental edit with Gail Anderson Dargetts. And then I also went to a week-long course at the University of Toronto. They do a whole series of creative writing courses. And this one was writing the young adult novel
Mm.
with Laurel Carter. So it sort of got workshopped along. And finally, then COVID hit and the world fell apart. And then in 2021, I was a teacher for 30 years. And finally, in 2021, I couldn't bear the thought of having to do COVID school anymore. And I retired. And that's when I actually finished the final draft and submitted it. And I got picked up by Latitude 46. So it's been an exciting retirement for sure.
Wow, for sure. That's amazing. I always love asking this question because it's easy to think that like a book is just written out in a couple of months and then it's done, but it's
Absolutely.
always a journey, usually a lifelong journey. So yeah,
Especially the first one. I think it seems to me that it's never a couple of years. Although, I mean, some people are lucky enough to be at that spot in their lives, but um, people, especially people my age, it seems like it's been a long time coming before it finally erupts, and that it is done.
yeah. Well, congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Our next question is The Stones of Burren Bay is set on Manitoulin Island, which I just recently learned is a very real island in Lake Huron. So what about this island made you decide that it was the place for Nori's story?
Yeah, Manitoulin Island is the largest freshwater island in the world, apparently,
Mm.
and it belongs to Canada. It's in the northern part of Lake Huron, um, along the North Shore. It's accessible by a swing bridge or by the ferry from Tobermory. So it has a very unique sort of position and sense of isolation there, historically anyway. Um, I'm a northern girl, so I grew up in Sudbury, not far from Manitoulin Island. So I went as a child, we camped. And then when my family ended, we actually lived there for a little while and then ended up back on the mainland. But we kept going. We kept going tenting, and then we had a trailer, and then recently we bought property. So it's a big part of our lives. And my family were a group of people who like to explore. So we know every nook and cranny of Manitoulin Island. And when I was writing this story, there were definite things that the island offered. It's called the island here. I know other places are also referred to as the island, but in Northern Ontario, it's the island. It offered a lot of things that just made it the perfect spot for Nori. First of all, um, it has a lengthy Indigenous history, way before probably white settlers even knew it existed. There were Indigenous people here, and the Anishinaabe, it seems that that spirit of the island, in fact, it's referred to as Spirit Island,
Mm.
is imbued in the rocks and the trees and the fields. It very much has that feeling of otherworldliness, and that fit to the magical realism components of the Stones of Burren Bay. The maritime environment on Manitoulin Island alone, there are, I believe it's 10 or 11 lighthouses or light standards. So very much in its history anyway, it was only that people got there by boat, and it was, shipping lanes before any cars or trains ever made it across the North Channel. So the maritime environment with lighthouses, because the lighthouse does figure prominently into the setting, also was important. And then as I got further into the story, and I knew there was a sort of a dual story going on. There's Nori, the protagonist's contemporary story, and then there was a historic story for an Irish immigrant girl named Una.
Mm.
So I wanted there to be a connection, and magically, there was a connection. There are Manitoulin Island is part of the Niagara Escarpment. It goes, from Hamilton along the high escarpment that we're familiar with in Ontario, and then goes down into the water and resurfaces again on the island, and then continues beyond. And and that limestone escarpment has had a lot of impact on the environment. And there is a spot in Ireland called the Burren. It's in County Clare, Ireland,
Mm.
has land formations very similar to those on the island. And so the connection between the past, Una's past, and Nori's present could be made through those very sturdy rock formations that we saw in both places. So it just was and I love the island. So it was a place that just felt right for Nori's story.
Hmm. It's almost like a puzzle. All the pieces fell into place there.
It did, and I am a puzzle doer, but this puzzle was a lot harder than any other puzzle I've done. But you're right, it started to sort of fit together. Um, but I think the key to that was letting it fit together and sort of searching for places where the story and the landscape of Manitoulin Island and then of the Burren in Ireland could sort of just meld together like a puzzle. So yes, definitely.
Very nice. Very nice. Um, I've also heard that you have another YA book on the horizon,
I
entitled For the Sake of Mercy. Um, I was wondering what your inspirations are for this new project, and are you able to give us a little teaser?
Well, definitely. I am also a poet. I have been studying Japanese form poetry for about 5 years.
Mhm.
I study with a woman named Vera Constantino, who is also a published Japanese form poet. We're members of Haiku Canada. So it's a love affair, definitely, with the Japanese form. And last year, I curated a show with an art gallery of my Japanese form poetry and the work of a woman named Florence Carlyle, who painted in the late 1800s and into the early 1900s. She has pieces at the Art Gallery of Ontario. She's well known now, but for a while, as with many female painters, they kind of were lost from the canon of Canadian painters. So this show came out, and I did, as I said, her painting in my work, and it started to create another story idea. In the Stones of Burn Bay, Nori's a budding visual artist. Well, in For the Sake of Mercy, the main character, Mercy, her name is Mercy Prayer. She's a poet. And more importantly, she's a poet. She is learning Japanese form poetry. The story is not told in verse, but it's her poetry is included in the telling of the story.
Mhm.
And um, it's Japanese form poetry is well known for capturing
Mm.
a moment in human life or in nature, and then working that moment. That's why it lends itself so well to ekphrastic work. But it
Mhm.
also lends itself it also lends itself to writing and sort of creating character through the poetry. So each chapter has Nori's poetry in it, and it has to do with her as she develops and as she deals with trauma in her own life.
Mm.
Trauma is a big theme in both books, and certainly it is in this book. Um, I thought what I could share is maybe one of the Haibun poems from the manuscript. Haibun is a specific kind of Japanese form that has three components. It has a title, it has a prose piece, and then it has a haiku at the end. They all work together, but they're not necessarily reflective of each other.
Mm.
And in this case, it's reflecting Mercy's early life, living with her grandparents. So I'll read that for you if you'd like. It's not very long.
That would be fantastic. Thank you. What a treat.
It's called Repercussions. Repercussions. I am 8 years old. My friend Ida and I are playing restaurant in the backyard. We collect our ingredients from the ground under the cedar trees and from my grandmother's gardens. We are hunters and gatherers of thin, short twigs, bark, and pine cones. We gather the broad leaves from the giant Empress Wu hostas planted in the shade of the tall maple tree in the front yard. We choose variegated leaves of deep purple, lime, and burgundy from the coleus plants that border the flower beds along the path from the sidewalk. We carefully select the most perfect red petals on the begonias planted in the window boxes. We mix water and soil we've dug out of the flower beds and create beautiful dishes of vibrant colors and earthly scents. Nan is not happy with what she sees. She's not happy when she finds us up to our elbows in the cut remains of her hard labor. We get our first lesson in gardening. Suet seed ball, sustenance in winter. Cat licks her lips. So that is a high bun, and that is Mercy's favorite form. And so there's a lot of high bun in the novel. I can't
Wow.
tell you anything else except that it's magical realism. There is another spirit. That's it. It's exciting.
Yes, so exciting. Thanks so much for sharing that. That was beautiful.
Oh, you're
The way,
welcome.
the way you describe nature is very gorgeous. It's
And that's what's beautiful about Japanese form. It's very sensual poetry. It's very touch, smells, sight, hearing. It's just very related to senses in the fewest amount of words you can. The Haibun actually probably has the most words because it has prose in it.
Mhm.
But certainly the haiku and the senryu are very brief snapshots. So they have to be pretty sensual to get your concept across.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much again. That's awesome.
Thank you.
The next question is, if you could pick a book that has influenced you most in your writing career, what would it be?
That was the hardest question that I had. I couldn't narrow it down to only one question because I'm an avid reader, or one book rather, because I'm an avid reader. But
Hmm.
in terms of the kind of books that I'm writing now, magical realism was a huge part. And I've read Isabella Allende, who's like, the quintessential. There are others. But I read a book called A Cure for Death by Lightning by Gail Anderson Dargatz. I think it was shortlisted for Giller. It really I always wanted supernatural or that kind of component to a story, but magical realism is that something extraordinary feeds into an otherwise ordinary world. And I think A Cure for Death by Lightning did that. And so the next book I read that was really important to my growth was by Laura Ruby, who is she writes YA
Mm.
and she writes magical realism. And the book I read first from her was Bone Gap. I've read many others of hers since, but Bone Gap really had an impact.
Mhm.
And then one other person who is she's a writer out of England named Kate Morton, and she writes multiple timelines, multiple characters that all do that puzzle thing and come together. And I love her work. So I'd say that those were sort of the three things or three writers I could narrow down as I love the most and had most impact on my writing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for answering that question. I know it's hard, but it's kind of a self-indulgent one for me.
It
That
is.
I can read the books that people recommend. So
Oh,
thank
that's
you.
wonderful.
All right. So our final question is a bit of a fun one that I'd like to ask everyone who does these Zoom interviews with me. Um, the question is, do you have any writing rituals like making a tea, listening to music, lighting a candle, that sort of thing?
I don't think I have a ritual, but I definitely have habits.
Mm.
The first thing I did when I retired, well, not the first thing. The first thing I did is have a drink, I'm pretty sure. I was looking for a way to habituate my writing, and eventually joined this group called PJ Writers. It's with the AWA, the Amherst Writers and Artists Association, and we gather every morning at an ungodly hour of 7:15,
Oof.
and we chat for 15 minutes, and then we write silently for an hour.
Mm.
I do that every morning, Monday to Friday. And that ritual, I suppose it is a kind of ritual, but it's definitely a habit, means that I do my writing first thing in the morning when I'm freshest and I think most productive. And so what I do the night before is I don't fall asleep until I know what I'm doing the next day. So
Mm.
the kind of go together. The only other thing I think of that I do that's a little bit more ritualistic is I collect words. And I have them all. I like to use colorful index cards. This goes back to my teacher thing, I think. And I do bubble letters and I make the word and they all go up on a bulletin board. And every January I pick a word that is my North Star word for the year. And usually I write a poem for it. I
Mhm.
don't have to always. And so that seems like it's the guiding word for the year. So those are sort of some of the things. They're not quite as ritualistic maybe as, sharpening your pencils and making a tea, but there are definitely things I do habitually as part of the process.
That's fantastic. Yeah, the having a writing community I find is very essential because writing can be such a solitary task that it's nice to have community around that. And I really like the idea of the North Star word for the year. I think I might have to think about my word for this year.
Yeah, and it takes, I usually start in December, kind of just, I look through dictionaries or, or whatever I'm reading if there's a word and it's weird. It's very weird, but something always jumps out that is meaningful.
Yeah,
So maybe that's magical realism in itself. Who knows?
I think so. I definitely think so. Well, thank you so much again, Emily, for joining me here at Young Adulting. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you. I've learned so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was very enjoyable. The questions were excellent.
Yay, I'm so glad. All right.
Except the book one was hard, but it was still a good one. I still had to think.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
very, very good questions.
Thank you for answering it. I appreciate it.